So, welcome to another Wargame review from theplayersaid.com. My name's Alexander.
And I'm Grant.
And today we're taking a look at a brand new game. It's called 1950, The Forgotten War. And it's designed by Ray Weiss. And it's put out by his brand new company.
Yes.
Called Conflict Simulations Limited.
There you go.
CSL.
Booyah.
Now, this is game number 2 of the 2140 series. Which is, it stands for, it's 2 hours and 140 counters, is kind of what that means.
Yep.
Game number 1 is
Verdun.
Is 1960 Verdun. Haven't played that one yet.
No.
But we have that lined up.
Yep.
So we wanted to play this one because it's a Korean war game, and we haven't played
never
much.
really played much.
Yeah. There's a bunch out there, but I think this may be the first one we've ever played.
I think that's the case.
So, an interesting place.
Embarrassingly enough, it's the case.
I'm sure there's a ton of good ones out there. So if you have recommendations for Korean war games,
us know.
Put them in the comments. So, this one, like I said, it's brand new. Comes in this cute
little
tiny
box,
which is nice.
Which I think is great, yeah.
Yeah, it's a brand new company, brand new games they put out. So it was exciting to see something that was kind of fresh and new coming from Ray.
Mm-hmm. Who we met at WBC.
Yes.
And I did an interview with, I think he has a game with Multi-Man Publishing.
Yes.
Rostov 41, which I think is pre-order still.
And I was looking at their website for this company that he founded. They have a ton of games coming out.
Yeah, they have like 10 or 12 planned.
I think there's like another 3 coming out in the next month and a half.
He's been putting the wood to it.
It's impressive what they're doing.
Yeah.
I didn't shoot an unboxing for this, but I'll show you the board here in a bit. The map is, I think it's 20.
It's on the bottom of the box.
Oh, is it? Does it say the size?
Right there.
It's 22 by 17. That's what it is. It's half a 22 by 34. Mm-hmm. It's kind of a small hex overlay, and they're half-inch counters,
which is one of the things that we struggled with.
Yeah,
we felt like it needed to be just a bit bigger.
But yeah, it's a little bit cluttered. It's single stacking, one counter per. So that's nice. It's not overstacked.
Right.
But the counters they're like the laser cut ones.
They're nice.
So they're quite thick, and they've got that nice printed to them. But sometimes that makes it like on the cardboard ones, because they're paper, they're tacky. I can stick my finger on it and pick it up, which is gross. But on these, you can't really do that. So there's a little bit of fiddling. Sometimes things get really quite cluttered.
Yeah.
But that's kind of some minor quibbles. Because the game itself has a lot of stuff going for it that's I think it's new, like new stuff.
I don't want to use the word revolutionary, but there's some different things here.
Yeah, I don't
really
think
some differences.
Some of the stuff here. So
yeah, and we'll talk about that.
Yeah, the biggest thing is none of the units in this game have a printed combat factor.
No.
Which was
very hard to get used to.
Cool, though.
It's very cool, though, yeah.
So, basically, the units have a rating, A through G, and I think F and G are, like, exclusively A units.
Yes.
So basically, your ground units have A, B, C, D on them. And that's it. That's basically a representation of their quality. Mm-hmm. So I think you had an armored division and a mechanized division.
A mech infantry, yeah.
And those were A's. Those were A's. Those were like your top quality troops. And then everything else, all your normal infantry were like B's. And I had kind of a mixture of everything. And some of my UN units were just like D's. They were terrible. They're support units more than anything.
And we'll talk about that, because that's really the role of some of those lesser quality units, is just to support attacks.
And
which makes a big difference.
So how it works is, when you start getting into combat, there's a bunch of modifiers for terrain and various kind of effects and things. But one of those modifiers is the difference in quality. Mm-hmm. So if I have an A unit fighting a D unit, you say kind of D, like C is +1, B is +2, A is +3. The difference between those is basically 3 steps. So
that's a +3 modifier.
3 modifier. And then on top of that, one of the coolest parts of the game, there is this kind of cup full of a ton of these chits.
There's probably 60 of those. Give 50, maybe 50?
Yeah, it's probably 45 or 50.
Because we've got 2, 4, about 10 on the board.
It wasn't quite half the counter sheet when I was punching it. It's probably about 45.
40.
But basically each side draws one of these, and it has on here, it says A, B, C, D, and that has the combat factor on it. But it has
it's double-sided.
It has it on both sides. So not only do you draw a random chit, you look at it, and then you flip it like a coin.
Which was cool.
Yes.
We had fun with it. We did.
Then whichever side lands face up, I had a B unit, mine's a 2, which is awful.
Yeah, and if mine was an A unit, I'm a 7.
Which is much better than my
It
2.
could have been a 10 if I'd have flipped the other side.
My reverse side for my B was a 5. So,
Yeah,
so
there you go.
You can get pretty hosed, or, you can get some really good chit rolls from that.
Which I think, and as I read the designer notes, he talked about that represented the readiness of each unit. So, imagine battle fatigue and lack of ammunition or injuries, or I think that's what that represents, and I think it's very interesting.
Yeah.
It adds a new element of depth to the combat. It gives you something else to think about.
Typically, and most of these combat chits, they still go in descending order. A, B, C, D, the numbers usually go from high to low.
Right.
There are a few where that is not the case. There
I'm
are some
looking at one right
really
there.
bad ones.
Yeah.
Where the A is like a 3.
And the C is a 5.
Right? So there are times where you can get absolutely hosed by these, but that's part of
the game.
Part of the game, and it's an enjoyable extra layer of kind of like,
Yep.
oh, this is the situation that we're in.
Yep.
And not knowing your unit's combat strength is something that I've seen in a couple games, but how that's resolved is a new one for me.
Yeah.
And I think, we spent half the time flipping the counters, which is fun. It's just...
And it went kind of awry here where we knocked some counters over. We really never had that problem.
Yeah.
We were more careful about it. We were being flippant in our flipping.
Yeah. But it's cool because you're like, I've got my good quality units, so I can kind of bank on those having a better chit roll.
Yeah.
But you still
not always.
never know.
Yeah. And it would be interesting to go through and categorize each of the different counters just to see for fun.
Yeah.
Of all the 40 A's, what is the distribution? Are 80% of them good and only 20% bad? I'd like to see that. And he may have put that somewhere, and I haven't seen that. But the analytical side of me wants to know that, because I want to know when I'm going into it, what are my odds?
Yes.
What are my odds?
Definitely, I'm not sure how many people would do that for fun, like you said.
Well, I'm a nerd. I am a nerd.
Yeah, I'm sure he has a spreadsheet with all that
he
stuff
does.
on it. But I think it's just a cool little addition to a game, an extra layer.
Yeah.
Because you still, that's your combat value. Then you have all the modifiers and a die roll on top of all that. So and then the difference between those two is your loss points, which you have to take those in certain ways.
So you add all of your modifiers, including the random chit draw, plus all your modifiers, and then you get to roll an 8-sider. So each of you roll an 8-sider and add that to your modifiers, and that gives your total combat value.
Yeah.
Did you say that?
Yes, and the difference between those is your loss points.
Yeah. So if I had a 13 total and you had a 11, you would lose 2, and they're called loss points.
I take 2 loss points, and then you can that can be included in doing retreats or flipping my unit to its kind of used side,
paying a victory point.
Yeah, or you can use victory points as a currency, which is very interesting. You have to be in supply to be able to do that, but you can spend a victory point instead of taking a loss point, basically, which this is a game that has the victory points on a pendulum. Mm-hmm. So, if you've got a good lead, I can sacrifice one because then I might get there, but you got to be careful with that, especially if you're on the lower end of that scale.
Yeah.
Or you can just, sometimes the results are already skewed.
So you outright eliminate the unit, and it soaks up all the losses.
Yeah, my lead, the difference is 7 because the rolls were terrible.
So on a D unit, you might be like, I'll just get rid of the unit.
Yeah.
Because you can roll for that routed unit, and it might come back. It's hard. I can't remember what the rolls were.
Yours, because you had the North Koreans.
It was 6 or higher.
6 or higher on an 8-sider.
So it's...
Mine were a little bit easier than that.
Right. So that's an interesting... So that's that's another interesting element. That economy of managing these victory points is very cool.
Yes.
Because an auto victory is if the UN ever gets to 0, right? To 0 victory points, that's a
auto win for the
auto
UN.
UN win. If it ever gets to 20 for the communist forces, it's an auto win for them. So you got to manage that.
Yes, and then one of the other very interesting parts of the game, for me at least, was that kind of how they resolved the air support and air superiority in this one. Basically, you have a bunch of air counters. Some of them are fighters, some of the kind of ground attack craft bombers, basically. And kind of before a game turn, you go back and forth with your opponent, assigning them to various holding boxes. And the holding boxes represent ground support missions, patrol missions,
Strategic
intercept
bombing.
missions, strategic bombing, things like that. So you're saying, oh, I want to do some strategic bombing, which gains you VPs, or I want to do some ground support because I'm going to try to get modifiers in some ground combats later on, or I do some patrols because my patrols can then try and attack your air missions that you're doing, or I can do some interdiction, which is basically trying to cut supply lines at certain points, and do some bits and pieces like that. Now, to be able to effectively to conduct air ops when you actually want to go to do them, you have to roll on an 8-sider, like a 1 or a 2 or a 3.
And it's hard.
Usually.
It's challenging.
It can be pretty tough.
Yeah.
Initiative helps you in that.
Right. You get a -1 if you have the initiative.
Yeah, and that's for like doing. I think there's effectiveness rating. I think that helps you on the effectiveness checks and some other bits and pieces. But so you're not guaranteed in getting that ground support. You get some dice rolling, but it's pretty quick, and which for this scale is nice, right? Oh, I want to do a ground support mission. Well, you've got a patrol guy, so we do a quick air-to-air combat, roll some d8s.
Right.
Okay, it failed. I don't get to do it, or I shoot you down so I can keep doing my ground assault. Then I still have to roll to see if I actually hit my target and do effective ground support. If I roll under that number again, then I get a modifier to my ground combat.
Yeah.
And then after that, you roll one more time, and if you roll low again under your value, you get to
use them
expand
again.
your box and use
recover
them.
Yeah.
That's very rare.
Which happened for you.
It happened once.
Yeah.
But, if you roll more than that, you just go to your spent box and you get to use it next turn.
Right.
But
you'll notice my spent air units, because I couldn't roll.
But it's a really clean way, keeping them kind of off map in these boxes. It's just kind of a little ancillary thing where you're like, oh, I'm doing this, let's do that. Oh, do this, let's do that. Instead of having them all on the board with here's how far they can go, all this stuff. The abstraction for that I felt was quite clean.
Was well done,
and it, whilst not necessarily super duper impactful in the game, because a lot of the time you're going to roll a lot of misses. Because they're hard, but when it does go, it feels great.
Well, and I also think, if you can look here, you had 5 air units to my 2. The North Koreans didn't have a lot of aircraft carriers.
No, they didn't.
So that represents the American and the UN power, which is historically accurate. The Chinese eventually get a couple of additional air units.
But that's probably going to be much
later in the game.
On in the war.
They don't come in until the UN is up here to the Yalu River, which is probably going to be later games, round 6 or 7, maybe 8. So lots of interesting mechanical ways that he dealt with things like combat and air support that I don't know have been done in a lot of other games, or I haven't played anything like that.
And there was some other interesting exceptions, because most of the time you'll do kind of like static combats where it's like, I didn't move, so I get to do an attack it, this way. There is mobile combat.
Right.
But you have to expend a lot of movement points to do that. So it's not like you can blitzkrieg in this one particularly. Not effectively, anyway.
It's called a meeting engagement.
Yes.
I think we kept calling it the wrong thing during the game, too. But meeting engagement or a prepared attack.
But doing that, if you're attacking someone and you're successful in doing that with your rolls, those loss points, if we have a difference in our rolls of 6, you don't take 6 loss points as the defender. Because my mobile combat, it's not necessarily as effective, so to speak, as like a big prepared assault.
Yeah.
You have a 2-to-1 ratio on those loss points. So you're only going to take 3 instead of 6. So I'm like, oh, I rolled amazingly, but it's not necessarily as good. So
Right.
There's some nuance to these games, and if I do a mobile assault into a city, that 2-to-1 goes to a 3-to-1. So you're only going to take 2 losses in that
Right.
instance. So you got to be pretty strategic in how you think about this.
Yeah, that's only going to be used in certain instances.
You're
not going to do that all the time.
You want to pick and choose those things when you can catch someone out and you're like, let's
Right.
go and get them. And the map isn't massive, physically speaking, but also kind of how it's represented on the board. You could probably, what is this, 10 hexes wide, kind of in the middle of the peninsula. So it's not a huge map. 140 counters total in this game,
including administrative and the chit draw.
So
counters.
really, I think we kind of counted them earlier. Do you know, there's probably 50 combat units altogether.
I think the DPRK had a total of 40 something. Between the
because they had the Chinese,
the North Korean and the PRC, People's Republic of China. I think there were, I want to say, 43.
Okay.
And you had a little less than
like
that, 36. I want to say. We'd have to go back and count them again.
I think it's much less than that, just based on the number of other counters.
Right.
But yeah, it's counter light. There's a little bit of clutter because everything's kind of it's very small.
Yeah.
But there's not necessarily huge room for doing maneuvers and things like that. But it is possible. If you break lines, you can punch through and do some cool kind of enveloping and circling maneuvers and things. That is possible.
Yeah, I was in danger of getting encircled there, and that would have been really, really bad.
Yeah, you start to get cut off. There is supply. Supply's pretty easy to trace in this one.
Yeah.
But if you start to get out of supply, things get pretty hairy. But
what
I'll do is I'll show you the board real quick, and kind of we can see at least some of the examples of combat and how things look, and wrap up with a few final thoughts. So here's a look at the board. As you see, it's kind of small hand for scale. The hex overlay is pretty small, and the printing here, this is a print-on-demand game, I think. I think when you order them, they kind of make it for you. Mostly it's pretty crisp, but I think due to the small and the scaling, the numbers in the hexes are very hard to see, but honestly, you don't use them. There's not, set up in this hex, set up in that hex. That's not how the game is kind of organized. It's just set up along the DMZ, set up in the towns and ports, and then that's it. So whilst it's hard to read the hex numbers, you don't need them. So honestly, not that big of a deal to me. That's kind of the only thing that I had a really hard time with. Sometimes we'll just take a look at the counters here as well. There were times, because these are the laser cut counters, and they're printed and they're nice, very usually bold and pretty functional. But there are these tiny little numbers in the top left hand corner. On some of the units, that was pretty hard to see. Grant had a couple where it was like, is that a 6 or an 8, which would determine which turn they come in on. But honestly, I didn't think it was that much of an issue as far as gameplay went. It just a little fiddly during the setup, but everything else in the game was functionally very, very good. 140 counters. It's a bunch of them are the Chinese counters, which don't come on until later on in the game. Once you start getting up along the Yalu River, that's when the Chinese come into the war and they flood them with a bunch of units. So you don't have too many on the board, and there's a bunch of them which start on the track, which come on gradually. So the Allied forces, the blue are the Republic of Korea, and the kind of the peach ones are the UN. The UN, there's none on the board to start with. It's just the Koreans defending against the North Koreans, and they're trying to weather the storm. The UN are going to just pour in troops over time as these turns go on, more and more come in to try and bolster these and push them back up north. And then, obviously, as they get further north, the Chinese come in, push them back to the DMZ, and that's how you end up, historically at least. Now, this game is tracked by victory points. It starts at 10, which is kind of neutral. If it gets to 0, the UN wins. If it gets to 20, the communists win. And basically, it's anytime the North Koreans gain victory points, it goes up. Anytime the UN forces gain victory points, they subtract them from the North Korean total, is effectively what it is. Whenever they would gain them, it gets that number lower. Victory points are earned by capturing cities, and the cities have these kind of white hex outlines. Seoul over here has a bunch as well. Those are worth victory points. And when you eliminate, I think eliminating units does them. Let me just double check. It has it all here on a play aid. Capturing cities, clearing mind hexes. Oh, that's how it was. There's the Pusan kind of bordered area here. If the communists breach that, they get victory points. Once the UN moves up adjacent to the Yalu River, they gain by subtracting 2 victory points as well. If they can breach the border early, before turn 4, they get more victory points, and you get points for shooting down air units as well. So gaining total victory, the game's going to have to have swung significantly in your favor, which I think is kind of unlikely, but there's just not that many city hexes on the board. But so getting an automatic victory, I just don't see that happening all that often. Most of the time, you're going to play out 12 turns, do the whole war, and you're going to end up with a very close total. It's going to be somewhere very close to this 10 value. So mostly this is done by moving and fighting. Moving is the value that's printed on here. Okay, so if you look at this unit, this is A6. And movement points are expended based on this little chart down here, but it's also expended based on faction. There's a couple of nuances here. So the Republic of Korea and the UN forces, they have a harder time moving through tough and mountain terrain. They have to spend 2 movements in rough and 3 in mountain. So these guys can't, it's much harder and slower going for them up here. Whereas the North Koreans and the Chinese forces, they spend fewer points moving through all this rough terrain. So there's some pretty interesting tactical choices again, just from movement. But 6 movement points. So if they're moving on the road, well, the road's only half a movement point, so you can end up going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. You can get a pretty decent space, but as soon as you start getting off road, 1, 2, 3, that's it, because this is mountainous terrain. And again, a guy with a 5 movement, he can go 1, 2, 3, and then the only other option he has is to move into clear terrain, basically. So the units can get pretty sticky, depending on where you land up. It means these roadways and these railways are also very, very important, especially for strategic movement. Once you start getting up here, you need these supply lines and transport lines so you can run guys up to keep you in a good strength. But that's the kind of a bit later on in the game. This is kind of an early game example. Again, these are very important. There's a lot more of a network down here. This is obviously quite bare and barren up here, but being able to, have a guy over here and he's going to strategic move anywhere that you might need him, very, very important. So that's the value that's printed on here. The other number, the A, or the A, you can see this guy's a B, a C, and a D. Those are the combat factor that we talked about. And basically, when you get into combat, let's just say, just for an example, this B is going to attack this C. You declare that, and then you would resolve any ground support combat that you might want to do, which we'll just say this, we're not going to do that right this second. I'll show you that in a second. You've got a B and a C. You both draw a chit. So this guy draws this one, and this guy draws this one. And then what you do, like we said, this is double-sided. So this guy, we're just going to flip it. Okay. And this ended up, he's a B. This is a terrible, terrible outcome for that guy. So the chit here it's not bad for some outcomes, but the B is a 2. If we flipped the other side, it would be a 7. So this is very bad. But you don't get to know this until after you declare your combat. And this guy, he's a C, so we're gonna flip it. Whoop. And he has a 2 as well. And I think the other side of this one too. Let's just, there you go. The other side could have been a 3, but we rolled a 2 side. So even though he's got a step up in quality, the combat value is the same, at least the base to start with. Now because he's attacking him, I'm in a clear terrain, so the only modifier comes from going across the river that divides them. So they have a +1 defensive modifier. Because of the natural difference between a B and a C, he has a +1 modifier. So we'll just kind of negate those. If you had air support, you would add that. It's possible in coastal or near coastal hexes, the kind of the US 7th Fleet can bombard, and that can give you also modifiers. You can get modifiers from, if you're in rough terrain or in cities, there's modifiers. There's modifiers for having adjacent guys. So if you attack, and this guy is on his attacking side as well, he can give a modifier. Well, he can't in that instance, but if he was over here, you could, adjacent guys, you get into, and if you can flank someone, so if you have someone on the opposite side, that's like a +3 modifier. It's really good. So you want to try doing that where you can at least. So you then roll a D8 each. So the North Korean, he's got a 2, not good, and the bottom guy's got a 5. So he has a 5, 6, 7 from his combat value, and that's it. And he has a 2, 3, 4. He's +1 for the difference between a B and a C, but he's +1 from the river, so we'll just say that's a wash. So we end up with a difference 5, 6, 7, 4, 2. So the difference is a 3, and so the defender wins. So the attacker's got to take 3 of these lost steps, basically, and there's a couple ways that you can do that. Because he is an A or a B quality unit, he can retreat 2 spaces, and that serves as 2 loss points. He really backs out of there. Well, I still got 1 to lose. I can flip him to his used side. Well, he's already going to flip to his used side because he was the lead attack unit. So he then has a real choice to make. I can eliminate him if I wanted to, and that would obviously soak up that last loss point. Or I can spend a victory point. Because he was in supply, I can give the UN a VP, and then that's that last loss point. And that gets really important. There's some choices to make. Because if I roll an 8, man, I gotta suck up, 6 losses. There's no way that I can do that without hosing my victory point. So I would just at that point say, I'm gonna eliminate him, and elimination is all your loss points, regardless of how many they are. So you might be put in a tough situation like that when you, if you roll poorly, or you get terrible chits like that, because how easy is it if we flip this to the other side? If he had had the 7 versus this, and and then we'd rolled even, if we'd rolled evens, well, suddenly I've got a significant advantage, and then this guy's he's got to move back. And here's the thing, this guy's a C, he's not an A or a B, so he can't do that kind of double or triple move back. He can only move 1 space for 1 loss point. And then it's like, well, I can flip him for 1 is 2. I got to take 4 more. I'm not going to give 4 victory points. So you're like, well, I'll just kind of, then you start killing guys. But more often than not, it gets really tight. You'll have kind of 1 or 2. If you're attacking and defending well, you're getting at least half decent chip pulls with the modifiers that you've set yourself up with terrain and with ground support and things like that. You're going to be exchanging 1 or 2 losses. So this isn't going to swing too badly if you need to, and the losses, you're going to be losing terrain rather than losing units, which, there's obviously some tactical nuance to how and when you choose to do that. Just quickly, the ground support, this is really cool. These are just little holding boxes for all the air units. At the beginning of the game, or the beginning of each turn, you just take turns assigning your kind of your air power. The initiative player goes first. So let's say it's late game. The UN has the initiative, so they can say, I'm going to put a guy in ground support. And then the North Koreans are like, well, I'm going to put a fighter into the patrol box because I want to be able to try and shoot him down because that's a function of patrol. And then my guy's like, well, I'm going to put in an escort and assign him to an escort mission with him. And then he's like, well, I've got one ground support unit, I'm going to put that here. And then I'm like, well, I've got a fighter, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to put a patrol unit to try and shoot down your ground support so that you couldn't get that. And then I'd have another couple of ground support units here, some bombers, so I'll try and use those. That's how that works, as kind of like a pre-turn, before you do any actions, that's what you do. So it's a really neat way of, I could do strategic bombing, which is literally bombing cities just to gain victory points. Or you can do interdiction, which helps you cut supply lines, so someone couldn't exchange VPs. You have to be in supply to exchange the VPs for loss points. Well, if I run interdiction, that person can't do that. So they would then have to eliminate themselves, basically, is what you usually end up doing in those situations. But ground support, it's pretty interesting. Let's say I'm going to run with this ground support here. I'd like to, we're doing a combat. I'm attacking someone. Let's say I've got my little... let's get a unit here. Let's say I've got my B5 and I'm attacking another B5. I declare this combat, but before we draw those chits, we resolve the air combat. And that happens with, I'm going to commit these guys to get my ground support. Well, the opponent has the option to say, I've got a patrol guy, I'm going to try and shoot you down so that you can't do it. And you basically just roll off. I have an F2 here, so I need to roll a 2 or less to succeed. I rolled a 1. Unbelievable. So I will shoot down, I'll damage the fighter here. And the fighter's going to shoot me back, doing a 7, he misses. He needs to get less than a 2 that he originally had. And the bomber can also target someone as well. He needs a 1 to hit, I think he needs, or it's -1. I think he needs a 2, which he gets. Unbelievable. Which means I'm going to get shot down because I'm already damaged. Woo! So I'm going to get routed, basically. But then that's kind of how that goes. You do this little air combat thing, but if you're successful, this bomber, he then gets the opportunity to roll his value or less. He needs a 3 or less, and he rolls a 1 again. Unbelievable. Where were you during the game? He rolls a 1. That's a terrible dice, by the way. I can't hardly read that. He rolled a 1. So he gets to add this 3 as a combat modifier to the combat, and 3 is an unbelievably strong modifier. So, I get to add this. So then you get back to your normal combat resolution. So draw a couple of chits. This one's here, and we flip them. Woo! So this North Korean's actually a 7. That's very strong. And let's see, the UN unit. Oh, it's the opposite of what it was before. It was a 2. So now we desperately needed that. Ground support, that's great. So I'm a 7 on a 2. Well, I've got +3 from my air support, which puts me at a 5. I'm attacking into a mountain terrain, so he's going to be a 7, 8, 9. Well, this is the part where I'm attacking, and I'm 2 hexes away from a coastal hex, and that's where, if at the beginning of the turn you had committed the 7th Fleet to this side of the map, I could get a +2 for that as well. You have to make that choice really early on in the first half of the month, kind of when you're doing all your bookkeeping at the beginning. You commit the 7th Fleet to either the Yellow Sea or the Sea of Japan, and then you say they're doing combat support over here. So every combat that's within 2 hexes of a coast, you get a +2 modifier. So if I had done that, I'm at a +2, +3. So a 5 +2 is like 7. This guy's a 7, 8, 9 already, and then we roll off again, just like we did. So he's a 4, so he's a 13, and I have a 3. Ooh, yikes! So I'm a 10. So again, I'm going to take 3 losses, and that's where you start getting. I'm going to backtrack a couple and flip myself. Or well, I had to flip already. So then you start kind of pouring those, leaking those sweet victory points. But that's really how it goes. These little chits add a real element of randomness to it. You just don't know what you're getting. And if you look here, most of them, they all have a pretty decent chance. And on the flip sides of them, one side's better than the other usually, but it depends which one you've got. And typically, the B's and C's are almost always lower than the A's and B's. So you do have some of a natural progression, but again, there are some chits out there that are like, these are just insane. Sometimes the A's are at 2 and the D's are like 3. But that's part of the randomness of it all. So that's just kind of a brief overview of the game. Things can get pretty tight. It's really important to have good battle lines, because this hex here, if I end up doing this, I've got 3 guys if they're all active. When I attack him, I get a +1 from both of these. If I end up, and I showed you that already, if we end up flanking a guy, so doing this attack, this guy's attacking, I'm +1 because I got an extra guy. I'm +3 because I have a guy kind of immediately opposite adjacent. And then you've got all your normal modifiers. So if I have my ground support, I can go in there. In the early game, you get a modifier from mechanized or armor. They get a +1 only for these first 3 turns. So there's a lot of nuance to this game. There's a lot of cool tactics. But if you look, I'll just kind of move everyone the way. The board is not very wide and not very big if you look at the hex overlay. So you got to be really careful. There's not necessarily a lot of room to maneuver. You have to make that room. And making that room is very, very key. And the way that the units move, they kind of move and then they flip to their kind of used side basically. And when they're used, they don't have a ZOC in an enemy country. So the North Korean units, they move down, they attack. They don't have a ZOC right now. They do when they're on this side, but they don't here. But the opposite's true north of the DMZ. The UN units, once they're expended, don't have a ZOC. So you have to be very careful about how you move them up, because I don't want to just, if I've got a line of North Korean units here, you don't want to, you don't want to just move a guy in here just to clog up your line, because if I move him in here and do that, he's just going to get pounded immediately. These guys will just pound on him. So you have to be very careful about how you choose to move and when. There's this little kind of back and forth grind. There's like a chess move almost. I'm trying to wait for you to make an inopportune move so I can take advantage of it, and trying to bait people to do things that they don't want to do. That's a lot of interesting numbers games in here. If I've got more units than you, I'll have more activations than you, so I can wait for some of these key moments. But there are other times where you don't have that opportunity. You have fewer units. You have to go and make hay while the sun shines. And if you can't, things can get pretty bad for you. So that's just a kind of a look. It can get a little bit messy with all the different counters, and you have to flip them all over at the end of the turn. So you should be careful. You don't, I'm just flipping them over, and you knock them all like that. You just got to be careful with this game. That's all. So what we'll do is we'll wrap up with a few final thoughts and get you sorted out. So that was a look at the map of the game. I had an enjoyable time with this. It was a very interesting learning experience. Mm-hmm. The rule book that we had was kind of, some of it was pretty tough to read. I'll be honest. Yeah. Just from the way it was laid out, and some of it was quite new in its concepts. Yeah. There is a living rule book online BGG that we had to download. Yeah. Where some of that is clarified and rewritten. And
I don't know if that was a condition more of, we got the game pretty quick.
Yeah, I don't.
Ray provided us a review copy. I don't know if he just got it out to us to get it out to us.
Which may have been the case.
And he found those changes, but I don't know. They did put the living rules on BGG. So
I would check those
out. Check those out. I would probably check them out, print them, and replace it.
Because we had we have some notes.
There's like
book editor that weren't deleted.
Like, this didn't feel right, or it was just interesting. I don't know if that's historic or
And then we looked on the
and it wasn't there in the living rules.
It was entirely rewritten to be so much more realistic and historical and better.
Right.
So that was
that was interesting.
There was at times I was like, okay, what is
Yeah.
the rulebook trying to tell me?
Right.
But once we got it, it wasn't that bad.
No, once we got into playing it, I think it became procedural. Hey, procedural combat.
And
Isn't
it
that
is the
what it's called?
procedural combat series
Yeah.
game.
You just follow the procedure and do.
Yeah, the combat has a number of steps and a good amount of modifiers, but once you look through it a couple times, do a few combats, it goes by.
I would think that there's going to be some player aids made by someone and posted. I would recommend downloading those because having all those modifiers on a table would be very nice.
Yeah, and having like a little track of like where the modifiers at, where your ones are at.
Yep.
Because then you can roll the dice. Then
we had to keep adding them up, and it just made sliding. We talk about that a lot. Just put it on the game board.
I'm spoiled because Unconditional Surrender has that. And I'm just like.
I think sometimes it's put in games and people don't use them, but this would be one that I think you would use it because of
when there's that many
amount of modifiers. Yeah. But we were talking, and Ray, I met you at WBC. We did an interview. We talked about some of your games. I would have to say this is a very interesting and a very unique game that I think for one of your first 2 or 3 games, I think you did a heck of a job creating a game that is very, very interesting. I'll use the word intriguing because I want to play it again because now that we've learned it, I want to see how some of those other elements turn out.
And I want to see more of this.
Yeah.
I don't know. Sometimes games get kind of like very sticky and methodical and predictable.
Stale. I think stale is a good word for that.
I love a game that has some pretty significant variables in it.
Yeah.
And so I'd like to see that in other titles. I don't know what their plans are, but I think that I would presume we would see this system in another
game sometime. But as far as for your effort, congrats. I think you did a great job on this. I think this is a very playable game. I think you need to understand, though, that the North Korean and the Chinese forces, it's a tough row to hoe during the first half of the game. And then when you get your Chinese units in, it's going to become a stalemate. It really is going to even out a little bit at that point. It's going to be a tough game. I also loved about this game, there is a chess-like element to it. When do I move in? Because it's an I activate one unit, and then you go and activate a unit. It's a matter of if I move up so that I can be attacked, that's a bad move.
Yeah.
Right? You want to be very cautious about how you move your units, when you move them. We talked about support units, and support units are very key. It's getting units up to support your main attacking units, your powerful units, because you get a bonus. So it's about planning. How do I do that? How do I get my guys up? How do I figure out how to get as many touching so that they can support me?
Yes.
I think that's very key and a part of the game that I really like.
In a game this modern, your battle lines are very important.
Yes.
And that's always an interesting one. And Korea, Barbarossa, those types of games, it's like that, where it's moving up and down. Oops.
Yeah.
And that's really, really important. Keeping your lines together and making sure you can get everything to go so you don't get kind of cut in half and everything falls apart and you can lose your momentum.
But I really liked that part of the game, and I think this was very interesting.
And maneuvering, speaking of maneuvering, that makes the game feel very small. I felt like there's so little space to maneuver at times where you're like... So like, I'm trying to like pinch, hit, and like your minute tactical maneuvers can make such a big difference, because if I can cut here, then I've got a lane to move guys out and around, whereas before they'd be in a zone of control, and that costs extra movement, and I couldn't outflank you in certain positions. There's a lot of nuance to the game just from the size of it almost as well.
Well, and also the size combined with the terrain and how it affects zones of control is also really interesting.
Yes.
And some of these units, the differing units, have different movement costs for the different types of terrain. So there were a lot of really neat elements that you're going to have to play this 3 or 4, maybe 5 times to get that down, to understand what your true advantages are and then try to take advantage of those.
You might need to play it that many times to get it down to 2 hours as well.
Yeah,
I think this is a little bit of a longer one.
I felt like it's a 3-hour game, I think.
This
And we were slow because we're trying to learn it, but
Yeah.
and we didn't play an entire game. I ended up conceding because I lost 2 major battles right there, and it was going to be over. But anyway, I really enjoyed it.
Yes.
I thought this was a very interesting play.
I had a good time with this one. So it's 1950, The Forgotten War, from CSL. Go check out their website. It's brand new. They have a ton of other things coming out, and it's all on there. It's a pretty reasonably priced game. It's very small. You could stick it anywhere on your shelf.
You could fit a lot of those on a shelf.
So I appreciate you guys tuning in. Go check this out. There's a little bit of information online. It's brand new though, so if you get it, put some stuff out there. Put your opinions out there because more people should hear about these kind of games. So I've been Alexander from theplayersaid.com.
And I'm Grant.